Come on a journey to lost civilizations. See ancient artifacts and long-lost ancient scrolls.
The strange writing on this clay brick is known as cuneiform. Now, this script...
Hear international presenter Gordon Gossett and travel with him to ancient Babylon and the island of Patmos to discover how ancient mysteries reveal the future.
I want to welcome you in the audience and those that are watching on screen to our series called Ancient Mysteries Reveal the Future. This is a series of audio-visual presentations where we look at ancient texts, we look at archaeology, we look at university history, and we see that some very ancient mysteries can reveal a very real future for us here today. In fact, these mysteries will reveal your future. It's a privilege to be here and to be able to share some amazing truths with you. I want to start with a story. In December 17th, 1927, the USS SS4, identical to the S-48 in the picture, was about to surface just off Cape Cod in the US, and a Coast Guard destroyer ran over the top of it and it sank straight to the bottom of the ocean. Immediately the military sprung into action to try and rescue any survivors. They sent divers down and they started to communicate with the divers by tapping on the hull of the torpedo room. And they found out through Morse code that there was 6 of the men on the submarine had survived. And as they're trying to get air down there, they're trying to get a salvage operation underway, one of the commanders on the submarine tapped on the hull these words: "Is there any hope? Is there any hope of rescue?" The captain, who was head of the salvage operation, he tapped back, "Yes, there's every hope." But sadly, they weren't able to save those 6 men. And all 40 men on that submarine perished. They pulled it to the surface, they salvaged it in 1928, it went back into active service and then was finally decommissioned in the year 1936. But I want to talk to you about, is there any hope? Is there any hope for people lost in a submarine? And many people are asking, is there any hope in this world in which we live today? Because there's the threat of terrorism at every hand. We have wars and rumours of wars. There's the Ukrainian crisis. We have the fires in California. I've just come back from California. The smoke was everywhere from those fires. They've got the biggest fire season they've ever had. The Ferguson fire was a record breaker, and now they've got the Mendocino fire, which is a complex of fires. The biggest fire they've ever had in Californian history. It's out of control. The firefighters are running to and fro, trying to find a way to control the fires. But sadly, those fires are uncontrollable. Hundreds of homes have been destroyed, thousands of homes in the likelihood of being destroyed at this moment. And if you go to New South Wales, just across the ditch from us, today they've got a terrible famine. And once a week, friends, once a week, one of the farmers, one of the landowners in New South Wales is committing suicide. That's a testimony that they have no hope. We have a fragile global economy, and many people are asking, is there any hope for our world? Is there any hope in the light of everything that's going on? Well, Winston Churchill, we all know who Winston Churchill was. He said, "I tell you, I see no hope for the world." Well, I don't know about you, friends, but I believe the world's in a worse state today than it was when Winston Churchill said those words. Sebastião Salgado is a famous photographer. He went to war zones. He went all around the world taking photographs. He put out a DVD. It was an Academy Award-winning documentary called La Salle de la Terre in French, or The Salt of the Earth. And Sebastião Salgado, when he saw what humanity was doing to humanity, he said there can be no salvation for mankind. Sebastião Salgado saw more of the world than any of us have probably ever seen, or will ever see. And he said there's no hope. He's seen some horrific things, and that video shows you some horrific things. So what does the future hold, friends? What does the future hold for us? Is there any hope? Do you know many people in the world want to know what does the future hold? You might not believe that, but I can tell you, based on fact, that many people are searching for answers about what the future holds. My friend Gary, he went on the internet and typed in prophecy or future events. He got over 74 million hits. People are turning to psychics today in unprecedented numbers, trying to learn what the future holds. Crystal ball readers, the tarot card readers. Time magazine did an article on psychics and the psychic phenomena in our world today. 6 out of every 250 predictions were correct. And some of those were, it's going to rain in California sometime this year. Fairly broad, fairly wide, generic prophecies. The average leading psychic accuracy is 16%, and people are putting their faith in psychics. There's 3 words I want you to remember, and as we go through our 25 programs, we're going to look at 3 words. It's going to be they're going to be the foundation of what we talk about. Everything we talk about is going to be logical, reasonable, and rational. Logical, reasonable, and rational. And I just want to share with you right from the start that it's illogical, unreasonable, and irrational to put your faith in psychics. Do you know why? Because if psychics could tell the future, they would have won Lotto last week. And they would win Lotto next week. And they'd win Lotto the week after that. They would not have to sit in a dingy little booth scamming $40 off you to tell you your future, would they? That's irrational. We have a lot of talk in the media about ancient predictions. Who's heard of the Mayan Calendar? There was huge talk about the Mayan Calendar in this decade, and the end of the world coming. And that was backed up by some prophecies apparently from Nostradamus. Nostradamus was also identifying a particular year. What year was it? When was the world going to end? It was 2012. In fact, Hollywood, they jumped on the bandwagon with this and they created a movie called 2012. Some of you may have seen that film. Some of you will remember this trailer. I'll just play it for you. They wouldn't. Nostradamus, the Mayan calendar, predicted that in 2012 the world was going to end. People got incensed with that. There was a lot of agitation in our world about that. There was a huge number of hits on the internet dealing with that. Do you know what happened, friends? Absolutely nothing. You can't trust these predictions, so how can we tell the future? In the year 2000, we had predictions of the Y2K Bug. You remember that? It was going to be a disaster. Do you remember what it really was? It was an open gold mine for Microsoft because everybody bought new computers and new software because the old stuff was going to break down. Nothing happened. So can we know the future? Psychics can't tell us. The Mayan calendar can't tell us. Is there a way that we can tell the future? If I was to tell you, tomorrow, you should advertise your home because on Monday, the shares in Air New Zealand are going to drop to 1 cent. 1 cent. The whole bottom's going to fall out of Air New Zealand shares. But by next Friday, they're going to go to an all-time high. So you should be selling your house on Monday, buying shares in Air New Zealand at 1 cent, and then on Friday, you're going to become extremely wealthy. If I was to tell you that, would you sell your house tomorrow? Why, do you not trust me? But if I had made predictions on the stock market week after week, year after year, decade after decade, and everybody that followed my counsel became a multi-millionaire and I'd never been wrong, would you trust me then? Well, to know the future, we need a trustworthy source, don't we? We need something that's got historical accuracy. Do you agree? And we need, second to historical accuracy, we need a proven track record, dependable predictions. And if somebody tells you about the stock market and they never get it wrong, that's dependable, isn't it? Is there such a source? Is there such a source that has historical accuracy and a proven track record? Is there something like that? Well, I want to tell you, absolutely there is. And in our research, the evidence that we're going to look at, we're going to go to archaeology, one of the great sciences available in our world today. And we're going to go to university history. We're going to compare the two. What is archaeology telling us, and what does university history tell us? Let's go to archaeology first. We're going to be talking a lot about Egypt, the magnificent land of the Nile. I've stayed just not far from there, Elephantine Island. There's awesome monuments. There's the Colossi of Memnon, the amazing tombs. This Hatshepsut's burial chamber, an amazing temple and memorial of her. And of course we have the pyramids. Everybody's heard of the pyramids in Egypt. And you have the Sphinx. It's an amazing place to go. It was the number one tourist destination on the planet until there was some terrorist activity. Now the economy's crashed. If you want to go to Egypt, go today. I can tell you that. If you go today, you'll get your hotels cheaper than ever before. You'll have no queues to wait in. They're really struggling with their tourist industry. But there was a tourist went there back in 1799 by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte. Who's heard of him? We've all heard of Napoleon Bonaparte, the French emperor. He made an amazing discovery beyond the pyramids, beyond Abu Simbel, beyond the Sphinx. The greatest discovery probably made was a stone. It was called the Rosetta Stone. This Rosetta Stone had hieroglyphic engravings. It had ancient Demotic Egyptian, and then it had the latter Egyptian language that they had some idea of. Well, they decided that these three inscriptions were the same inscription in three different languages. And Jean-Francois Champollion spent 20 years deciphering it. And he compared one language with the other. And eventually he was able to unlock the hieroglyphic code. And so now we could read all of the hieroglyphs on the tombs, the temples, the pyramids in Egypt. It just unlocked history for us. I want to take you over to Iran now. An amazing place to visit. One of the places you'd go if you're visiting Iran is the Behishtan Monument. There's an engraving there of Darius after conquering his enemies. You notice Darius here has his foot on his enemy's neck, proving his authority. Well, they had on this monument an inscription in three languages as well. Two Akkadian languages. It was cuneiform, and then there was Babylonian and Elamite. Now they could read one of those languages. Henry Rawlinson, a soldier, he painstakingly, just like Jean-Francois Champollion, he started to go through it, and he unlocked the code of the cuneiform, so we could actually read the Mesopotamian cuneiform now. Two amazing steps in archaeological history. I want to take you to another place, the Dead Sea. It's a completely dead place, full of salt. Has anybody been to the Dead Sea? Sure, there's people who have been to the Dead Sea. People watching have been to the Dead Sea. An amazing place to swim in, but they don't tell you that if you get it in your eyes, it'll blind you. So you need to be very careful there. Not far from the Dead Sea is these caves, the Qumran caves. Three little Bedouin boys were caring for their goats, and some of the goats ran off. And young Muhammad here, Muhammad Adib, he threw a rock, and the rock went into a cave. Went through the entrance of one of these caves. And he and Khalil Muhammad and their friend, they went, there's treasure, because they heard broken pottery. You know what young boys are like? Life's an adventure. And at every unusual situation. There's going to be treasure, there's going to be fame and fortune. So they ran up the hill, they went into the cave, and all they found was some broken pottery jars with some old parchments in them. So they pulled the parchments out, and they took them and they showed them to the elders of their village. They then showed them to a man called Cando, who was a dealer in antiquities. And Cando bought them off them for $100 US. The Dead Sea Scrolls were sold for $100 US. They were then sold on for $500,000 US. Now that's not a bad increase, is it? That's a good investment Cando made. But today they're priceless. They're beyond value. What were these things? They're called the Dead Sea Scrolls. And why are they so valuable, friends? Why would these old bits of papyrus be so valuable? Old parchment like this is genuine Egyptian papyrus. Some were written on vellum, which is animal hides that have been dried. But these were very ancient parchments. Why are they so valuable? Well, first and foremost, they're very old. The style of the script tells them how old they are. We can date them through radiocarbon dating, but the script changes. Does script change in our world? Have you ever tried to read a book from the 1600s? Somebody showed me a copy of the Bible the other day. It's the genuine 1611 version in the Elizabethan language. And the F's, the S's, it's really difficult to read. Our script changes, and it changed in the ancient times as well. They found coins in those caves, and those coins date these manuscripts from between 100 to 200 BC, about 2,100 to 2,200 years ago. So what are these scrolls? What were these manuscripts that the little Bedouin boys found and that people found so valuable? They're willing to pay $500,000 for them. What were these scrolls? 30% of them were just civil documents about the running of the community. Another 30% were to deal with the rites and the religious observances of the group that wrote them. They believed they were called the Essenes. But 40%, the greater proportion of them, were the ancient Old Testament books of the Bible. Every book except the book of Esther was found there. I want to put it to you that these ancient manuscripts that'll line up perfectly today, these things are from 200 BC, and people say, oh, the Bible's changed, we can't trust it today. It's been changed year after year, time and time again. I want to put it to you, my friends, that when they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's almost identical to what we have today. The entire scroll of Isaiah they have. The entire book of Isaiah, one of the biggest books in the Old Testament, and there's only a couple of letters that are slightly changed from what we have today. Is that amazing? No Chinese whispers here. They haven't changed through time. So what I have in my hand here today is exactly the same as what the Essenes were writing by hand, meticulously. If they made one mistake, they threw the entire document away. They meticulously copied these manuscripts. So historical accuracy, absolutely. What about a proven track record? Archaeology and archaeologists, W.F. Albright, he's one of the greatest archaeologists. He was the president of the World Archaeological Society. He was the author of over 800 works on archaeology, director of the American School of Oriental Research. He says, this is W.F. Albright saying this man has got some good credentials. He says, in the center of history stands what? The Bible. Thanks to modern research, we can now recognize its substantial historicity. That's historical accuracy. As an historical document, this book has been proven beyond all other books. To sum up, we can treat the Bible from beginning to end as an authentic document on religious history. I'm not saying that, friends. W.F. Albright is saying that. but I believe what he's saying with 100%, based on my research as well. We'll go to ancient Babylon. Just check the historical accuracy. In ancient Babylon, this is in Iraq, 50 miles from the modern capital of Baghdad. Going back 2,500 years ago, there was a man by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. He was not the originator of the city of Babylon. Babylon goes way back to almost time immemorial. But in Neo-Babylon, when it came, a resurgence of power and dominance of the region, Nebuchadnezzar was sitting at the head of this nation. Historians repeatedly and scholars repeatedly claimed that Nebuchadnezzar did not exist. Because the only record that we had of Nebuchadnezzar was this book here. He's mentioned in the books of Jeremiah and in the books of Daniel. And scholars said this is just a fairy tale. This man didn't exist. But when they unearthed ancient Babylon, they found the Ishtar gates. Daniel, who wrote the book of Daniel, he would have walked through those gates, not those ones, because they're copies. If you go to Iraq today, you'll find the copies. They've built a model. The real gates are in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. They pulled them to pieces, took them to Berlin and rebuilt them. They're there today. There's this walkway. This was the walkway into the city, lined with golden lions. When they dug that gate up, they found this inscription: I, Nebuchadnezzar, laid the foundation of the gates. I find that highly improbable. That a man who appears in a fairy tale 2,500 years later could have written inscription on the bottom of the gates, don't you? They found many bricks in the structure of the city that bore his name, like these two here that are in the Pergamon Museum today. Did Nebuchadnezzar exist? Was the Bible correct? Absolutely. Nebuchadnezzar became famous because he destroyed Jerusalem, the city of the Jews. The people who wrote the book, the people who had this book, he destroyed their city in 586 BC. We've proven historical accuracy, haven't we? What about a proven track record, dependable predictions? I want to put it to you. In fact, I want to put a case to you that the Bible has a proven track record at telling the future. And we're going to have a look at something in the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel was written 530 BC. And in Daniel chapter 2, the king Nebuchadnezzar, the man that apparently didn't exist, remember, until they found his name on the blocks, he had a dream. And the Babylonians put a lot of store in dreams. One of the things the archaeologists found is these dream omen tablets. So they believed that a dream had something to do with the other world, with the spiritual world, with the gods. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and his dream troubled him. The dream predicted 4 successive empires to rule the world. And they did. And I'm going to show you. It talked about the political state of Europe today. He had this dream 2,500 years ago, friends, and I'm putting it to you that he talked about the political state of Europe in 2018. He didn't know what he dreamed. He forgot his dream, but he knew it was an important dream. Have you ever done that? I remember the other day I had an amazing dream, and I thought, man, I've got to tell my wife in the morning what that was all about. I woke up in the morning, I remembered I'd had an amazing dream. What the dream was about, I couldn't tell you to this day, but I knew it was a good one. I remember the waking up thinking, I've got to remember that, and then I forgot. Well, that's what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. So he called in his advisors. He called in astrologers. These were people that studied the movements of the stars, believing they could tell the future. His magicians, his psychics, his Chaldeans. Chaldeans were the PhDs at the university, if you like. They were the most learned men in the nation. Here's a Babylonian astrology chart. It's amazing what the archaeologists are unearthing that tells us about these ancient cultures. They put a lot of store in astrology, the Babylonians. These magicians, these Chaldeans, these soothsayers, these crystal ball readers couldn't tell them the future any more than the ones that can't predict what lotto numbers are going to come up today. So he threw a bit of a hissy fit. He had a bit of a temper, this man Nebuchadnezzar. As you read through his account in the scripture, he did some pretty terrible things. One king, he killed his sons in front of his eyes. Now, if you're a parent, any parent here, I've got 3 sons. I could not imagine anything more horrific than watching my sons be slaughtered. But after slaughtering them, he ripped Zedekiah's eyes out so that he'd never see another thing. The last thing he'd ever remember was his sons being killed. This man was not a sensitive New Age guy. Anything but. And he ordered all of the wise men to be put to death. Daniel, as a very young man, had become one of the wise men. In fact, the wisest of the wise men at a very young age, through following some principles that we'll look at in a later program. We're going to find Daniel's secret to his wisdom. He was sentenced to death as well. When he found out about it, he said, whoa, what's going on here? Why is it so hasty? And he asked for some time. And he did something very wise. Daniel went and prayed. He went and talked to the God that's mentioned in every page of this book. The God that the Jews worship, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He talked to him. He said, I'm in a bit of a bind, and tomorrow my head and my body are going to go in different directions unless you intervene. And God intervened, and he gave him the same dream. And he went in before the king and he said, King, I know what you dreamed. Nebuchadnezzar challenged his wise men because if I told you I dreamed about an eagle eating some flowers and dropping them into a bowl of grape juice, you'd think, Gordon, you had too much ice cream before you went to bed. But you could come up with some theory on that, couldn't you? Eagle could be America, flowers could be Holland. You could come up with some theory, and I wouldn't know whether you were right or wrong, but Nebuchadnezzar challenged his wise men. He said, you tell me the dream, and I know that you'll be able to tell the interpretation. So Daniel tells him what he dreamed, and he goes, that's it. It all came back to him. And what did he dream? He dreamed of a man, an image of a man made of different metals. He had a head of gold, head of solid gold, and then chest and arms of silver. He had belly and thighs of bronze. And then he had these long legs of iron. And at the bottom, the feet were mixed with iron and clay. And then he saw this stone cut out of it without hands come flying from heaven. It hit the image and its feet shattered it. And then that stone became a great mountain and it filled the whole earth. That's a bit like my dream about the eagles and the flowers and the red grape juice, isn't it? What is that talking about? That's what Nebuchadnezzar says. So what does it mean? What it means, friends, is that there's going to be a succession of 4 world empires. And then there's going to be the last empire. And I'm going to use the words of Daniel, which he got from God, to interpret the dream. People say, well, you know, you can take this book and interpret it the way you want. Somebody else can take it and they can read it and come up with a different conclusion. Well, I want you watching and the people here, I want you today to tell me if there's any other interpretation than the one that was given. So as Daniel was speaking to Nebuchadnezzar, he said, you are this head of gold. You are this head of gold. Could you give me the other 19 ways of interpreting that, please? Is there any other way of interpreting that? There isn't there? There is no other way. The only way you can interpret that is that you and your kingdom are the head of gold. And Babylon was truly a golden empire. after they were overthrown, we're going to talk about that in detail, an amazing prophecy about this man called Cyrus. He took many treasures. He took many treasures from Babylon. Xerxes, another Persian king, he took $150 million worth of treasures from Babylon. And if that doesn't seem like a lot, Alexander the Great took 500 camels loaded with gold. That's a lot today, friends. In Babylon, in one temple, the Temple of Marduk, they had 18 tons of gold. The throne in there alone was 8.5 tons of solid gold. It was truly a golden empire. It was the biggest of the ancient cities. It was 16 kilometres around, or 10 miles in circumference. Let's compare that to other ancient cities that we may have heard of. Look at Rome. Rome is only 9.6 or 9.6 kilometres or 6 miles around. And Athens, the capital of Greece, was only 6.4 or 4 miles. You see how big Babylon was as an ancient city? The walls around the top, 300 feet tall, 85 feet wide, they had chariot races around the top of the walls. And historians tell us, and the archaeologists have discovered writings that said that when the Persians besieged the city, the Babylonians would throw food off the wall at them. The walls were impregnable, and they couldn't be starved out because they had the river Euphrates running through the centre of the city. They had food for 20 years. How could such a nation be overthrown? So here's an artist's impression of the river running through the city. They had a waterway through it. But in interpreting the prophecy, Daniel says, "But your kingdom is only the head." He said that your kingdom is going to come to an end. And we know from history, the golden kingdom of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, went from 605 BC to 539 BC. What happened to Babylon? What happened to Babylon? Daniel said, "But after you shall arise another kingdom." And what does he say? Inferior to yours. I know in this country that people are very proud of the rugby team here, the most successful sporting team in the world. Imagine if I was to tell you that they're going to get beaten by Croatia next week. Or Ivory Coast. Or Iceland. I don't even think they play rugby in Iceland. But imagine being told that an inferior kingdom to you is going to take you over. Well, that's what he was told. And the Medo-Persia Empire came on the scene and they defeated Babylon. We're going to talk about that at another session in more detail. But Bellshazzar, he was Babylon's last king. He was the son of Nabonidus. Once again, archaeologists have unearthed a cylinder. The Persians had a way of keeping records. They would write on clay cylinders in cuneiform language, which fortunately, because of Rawlinson, we can now interpret. They would write their history and big events that happened in their lives in clay, bake it in the oven, and we still have them today. And they found the Nabonidus cylinder, and it says Belshazzar, the son of Nabonidus. Would you be surprised if I told you that scholars and skeptics and historians said that Belshazzar never existed? And they had to eat humble pie when this cylinder was discovered. It says Nabonidus entrusted the kingship to Belshazzar in the 3rd year of his reign. Archaeology is unearthing some amazing truth, don't you believe? Belshazzar was the co-regent or the joint king of Babylon, Daniel chapter 5 tells us. And they were having a party. They had a big drunken party. And we've got two ancient historians that purport the same things that the Bible says. Herodotus and Xenophon, they tell us, these ancient Greek historians, that Babylon was conquered by the Medo-Persians. They besieged Babylon. There was no way to get in. But on October 13th, 539 BC, they had a plan. Cyrus, the general of the Persians, he created canals and he diverted that great river Euphrates. And he marched his army up the riverbed, through the gates that for some reason were left open. They had a system, they had a plan, a contingency should the river dry up or somebody try that ploy, they would just shut the gates, but for some reason the gates weren't open. And it was prophesied 200 years before the man that did it, before Cyrus was born, exactly what would happen. We'll go into that in more detail at another session. But they marched up underneath the wall. They took the city of Babylon, and Babylon fell. 200 years before, as I said. The Bible predicted that Cyrus would restore the temple. This is an amazing prophecy. It's found in the book of Isaiah. It says, "Thus says the Lord to his anointed." That's the same word as Christ, the Messiah, "to Cyrus, whose right hand I've held, to subdue nations before him, and to loose the arm of kings, to open before him the double doors," or two-levered gates in some versions. That's the gates in the river. "And the gates shall not be shut." Goes on to say that he would rebuild Jerusalem and lay the foundation of the temple. Now that's an amazing prophecy, friends. Why is it amazing? Because when that prophecy was made, there was nothing wrong with the temple. The temple was intact. The city was intact. It was as if Isaiah was having a psychotic event. Why would you say a city is going to be rebuilt and a temple is going to be rebuilt when you can just look at it standing there? Because within that 200-year period, that city was going to be destroyed. That temple was going to be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. And the prophecy was given that he would rebuild it. Josephus tells us about that event as well. He's a Jewish historian, Flavius Josephus. Says here, who says of Cyrus, "He is my shepherd, and he shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple your foundation shall be laid." Amazing prophecy, isn't it, friends? A prophecy about something that didn't even need to be prophesied about at the time. And then we have one of the greatest archaeological finds of all time. It's called the Cyrus Cylinder. And I have it here with me. Or a copy. If this was the real Cyrus Cylinder, there would be armed guards all around this place. This is one of the greatest treasures. This is a copy that I picked up in Persepolis. We'll talk about Persepolis in a moment. Just want to warn anybody, if you go to Persepolis and then decide to go to Israel, do not try to take one of those across the border. I spent 20 minutes convincing them it wasn't a bomb. The man behind me had one and he took 10 minutes. The next man, after 5 of us had these, they started to let them go through, but mine was the first one. I said, "Don't break it." They're trying to break the thing open because it's got the crack in it, thinking it had been sealed up and there was dynamite in there or something. But this Cyrus Cylinder tells the story of how Cyrus overthrew the city, validating the Bible. The Bible's got prophetic reliability, but it doesn't end there. He goes on to say that you are the head of gold. After you, you'll be overthrown by an inferior nation. And then he says, after Medo-Persia comes to an end, a third kingdom, a branch which shall rule over the whole earth. Did that happen in history, friends? If you know your history from high school, what happened after the Persian Empire? Alexander the Great. He defeated the Medes and the Persians in the Battle of Arbela in 331 AD. 30,000 men against an army of an absolute minimum of 250,000. Some historians claim that the Persians had 800,000 and yet Alexander the Great conquered them. His men were wearing bronze or brass skirts, girdles and helmets and spears. They were a bronze empire. Xerxes had destroyed Athens, and they believe that is the reason that Alexander the Great then went and destroyed the city of Persepolis, where I bought that Cyrus Cylinder from. The city of Persepolis was destroyed, but they believe in a tit-for-tat response by Alexander the Great. But did Greece last forever? No, friends. Went from 331, the Battle of Arbela, to 168, the Battle of Pydna. Daniel goes on as he's interpreting this dream, and Nebuchadnezzar, I can see him sitting in his throne, sitting forward, wanting to know what comes next. Or maybe just sitting there still reeling from the fact that his kingdom's not going to last forever. He says, finally there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron. Strong as iron. And the iron monarchy of Rome defeated Greece, 168 BC, the Battle of Pydna. Is that an amazing prediction? What do you think? This is going centuries in the future from Daniel's time, from Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel's time, predicting the future of empires. The Iron Empire was a formidable fighting machine, and it lasted from 168 to 476 AD. It's no great thing for a person to have taken a punt and said that Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom of Babylon is not going to last forever. That would be a fairly safe bet to say your kingdom's not going to last forever. Because prior to Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, there'd been the Sumerians and the Hittites and the Assyrians and Egypt. There was always an empire would rise and then decline. It would be conquered by someone else. To say that your empire is going to be destroyed by somebody, and then they'll get destroyed by somebody in the future, and then in the future somebody's going to take them over, that was just the course of history. That's what had always happened. But I tell you, friends, only a divine being could have predicted what would happen next. History affirms for us Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom was a golden kingdom that was overthrown by an inferior nation, the Persians. That in turn was taken over by a bronze kingdom. That was taken over by an iron kingdom. And then a fifth kingdom, and then a sixth kingdom. No, friends, that's not what Daniel said. When talking to Nebuchadnezzar, he said, whereas you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. What happens to the fourth kingdom, friends? What happens to the fourth kingdom? It's divided. A subsequent prophecy validates the fact 10 toes is representing 10 kingdoms. Rome was divided, as predicted 1,000 years before, into 10 different kingdoms. Rome got divided in 476 AD by barbarian tribes attacking them on every hand into what we call Europe today. That was predicted 1,000 years before. Can we trust this book? Because if it had said a fifth empire, and the fifth empire had have come and then a sixth empire, then we might as well use that book there for lighting our fires with. But friends, that book said with unerring accuracy that fourth kingdom would be divided into 10. And that became Western Europe as we know it today. And Western Europe continues to this very day. But the prophecy gets intriguing. I find it very intriguing. It says, as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay or miry clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere one to another, as iron does not mix with clay. Do you know what mingle themselves with the seed of men means? It's probably not a phrase that anybody here has used in the last week, last year, probably for all of your life. It's not a phraseology that we use, but mingling with the seed of men means intermarrying. So it says that this empire that was broken up into what's modern Europe today was going to intermarry, but it would never unite. The Bible said it would never join together. The Bible has been correct for 1,500 years because Europe has been divided for 1,500 years. There's been many attempts to unite Europe. Charlemagne, Louis XIV. There's Napoleon Bonaparte. Once again, he comes on the scene. Napoleon said there will be one Europe, there will be one currency, there will be one language, there will be one government over all Europe. And at the end, when a snowflake destroyed his army, he understood the prophecy that we're just sharing here today, the prophecy of Daniel 2, and he said, God Almighty is too powerful, is too much for me. Who's too much for him? What did God have to do it? Kaiser Wilhelm. He attempted at the beginning of the last century, he attempted to unite Europe. That's what led to the First World War. This Metz Cathedral here in France, France was approached to support the Kaiser. And they needed a new roof on this cathedral. Kaiser Wilhelm says, well, if you support me in my aspirations to overthrow Europe, I want you to do one thing. This cathedral here had a statue of the prophet Daniel. He said, I want you to remove the prophet Daniel's head and put my head in the place of the prophet Daniel. Why did he want to do that? To show that, because he knew the prophecy and he wanted to prove that the prophecy was wrong. But it says they will not adhere one to another. They will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not mix together. They had marriage relationships. I want to take you to Denmark now, to Frederiksborg Castle. And if you go inside Frederiksborg Castle, as you go in the entrance, there's this huge mural, which is the family tree of all of the kings and queens of Europe. And in the First World War, every king and every queen of Europe, all those nations that it had now divided into, every one of them was related to Queen Victoria. They were all related. It was a big family squabble. And the Bible predicted that nearly 2,500 years before. They would intermarry, but they would not mix one to another. They failed. And then came Adolf Hitler. This is getting more close to our time, isn't it? He attempted to unite Europe. He said there would be one people, one empire, one leader. And he got very close. You know, friends, there was only one nation that he didn't overthrow, and that was England. But when Adolf Hitler set out, he was claiming God was on his side. He says, as Führer of the German people and Chancellor of the Reich, I can thank God at this moment that He has so wonderfully blessed us in our hard struggle for what is our right. Anybody who fought in that Second World War would have found that statement galling. My father fought in that war. And we should beg him that we and all other nations may find the right way so that not only the German people, but all Europe may once more be granted the blessing of peace. I'm sorry, Adolf, I understood you started the fight. But that was in 1939 before the Reichstag. He made another statement in 1942. He says, Lord God, give us the strength that we may obtain our liberty for our children and our children's children, not only for ourselves, but also for all the other peoples of Europe. Did you think this man was godly? He was claiming God was working for the German people. He said, for this is a war which we all wage, this time not for our German people alone, it is a war for all Europe, and with it, in the long run, for all of mankind. He had a holy cause, he thought. I'm just putting these slides on the screen to just put the suggestion to you that Adolf Hitler thought him and God were working in tandem. Do you see that? But he had a change. Because Daniel's prophecy said they would never join together. And one of his house staff, a young lady, shared with Adolf Hitler what we're talking about here tonight, this prophecy of this metal man. And she said, Führer, you will never conquer England. You will never conquer England because of this prophecy. And Adolf Hitler had a complete change of tune. In March 1942, now he wrote, to my people, we do not need anything from God. Is that diametric to what he's already been saying? We do not ask him for anything except that he may let us alone. We want to fight our own wars with our own guns without God. We want to gain our own victory without the help of God. That's schizophrenia, isn't it? Compared to what he had already said previously. But the first statements he said, he believed God was on his side. But when he suddenly realised he was going to be thwarted in his aims to overthrow all of Europe, he became very disgruntled with God and told him to leave them alone. I don't have time to give you all the history of what happened with the calm strip of water that got our soldiers off from Dunkirk in the middle of this huge raging storm, or the fog that came in for 3 days that delivered England. But when I first studied it, I went over to see my next door neighbour, who was a SAS soldier from Britain, British SAS soldier. And I said, Brian, I've just been studying. Someone's trying to tell me, and I told him the stories. Do you know anything about that? And I thought I did listen up when I was at school, at least some of the time, and I would have heard that. But I said, have you heard that God looked after England? And he said, well, of course, every English schoolboy is taught that God delivered England. I walked away shaking my head saying, why aren't you a Christian? He knew this. I didn't know this. But Adolf Hitler found out that he couldn't overthrow England. And today we have what is so-called the United States of Europe. Francois Mitterrand from France, he said, a great power is being born in United Europe. Helmut Kohl, the Chancellor of Germany, said, the course is irreversible. And then we have this man here, he says, we can and will succeed in creating a unified, prosperous, democratic Europe where citizens can live in peace and freedom. A unified Europe. Friends, an ancient book, 2,500 years ago, said it will never be unified. Romano Prodi claims it will be. But Time magazine says, back in 1999, the European Commission is still far from being the European government Prodi would like to claim it is. And then we have Brexit, Britain pulling out of it. And to this day, friends, Europe remains divided. How could an ancient manuscript predict with such unerring accuracy the future events in the world and what's going to be taking place in our world today? But then Daniel hadn't finished. He said, you watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and it broke them in pieces. What is the stone, friends? Verse 44 tells us, in the days of these kings. Which kings? The kings, the divided kings of Europe, in the time when Europe is still extant. In the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So while Western Europe is still in place, the last empire is about to appear. The prophecy doesn't have any more empires, no more divisions. The only thing taking place is God is going to set up His kingdom. The great God has shown the king what shall come to pass in the future, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. You know, Daniel said that by faith. What evidence did he have? God gave him a dream. Didn't he, Richard? He gave him a dream. God gave him a dream. And in that dream, he just saw some future events. He had no evidence. 2,500 years later, do we have evidence? We have a plethora of evidence, friends. We saw the 4 empires rise. We saw the last one get divided into 10. We've seen for 1,500 years, every attempt to unite it has come to naught. We've got more to put our faith in than what Daniel had, but he said the interpretation is sure. We've seen every one of those events take place. Revelation gives us a window on the last empire. It says the kingdoms of this world, Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, Rome, the divided nations of Europe, have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of His Christ, and He shall reign for how long? Not 1,500 years. Not 1,500 years like Europe. Not 500 years like Rome. Not 200 years like Greece, but forever and ever, friends. God will wipe away every tear from their eye, and there shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things are passed away. Then He who sat on the throne said, behold, I make all things new. I want to ask you, friends, does that sound like good news? No tears, no pain, no sorrow, no death. We're going to do a whole program on what this actually means for us. The dream is certain and the interpretation thereof is sure. I want to ask you, friends, when we think about this, is there any hope? Do we have hope? Beyond the here and now? Absolutely. There is absolute hope. Is there any hope when we look at what's going on all around us in the universe? Friends, there is hope. All of the predictions about the year 2000 and 2012 are all about doom and gloom and destruction. But God's prophecy, what's it about? It's about hope and peace and meaning and purpose of life. God says, for I know the plans I have for you. The plans I have for you, each one of you. plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. Essentials for knowing the future: historical accuracy, proven track record, dependable reliability. Does the Bible meet the requirements? That's only one prophecy. When we use the evidence before us and we look at ancient civilizations, we see there's 800 prophetic verses. 90% have already been fulfilled. Do you know how many have been wrong? None. There's never been a prophecy in the Bible that's been proven wrong. We're not talking a handful out of every 250. We're not talking 3%. We're talking 100% accuracy, friends. There's 10% still to be fulfilled. And the book of Daniel, the book of Revelation give us insights into that. And I want to share with you in closing, friends, there is absolute hope. Not because I've told you to sell your house and buy the shares in Air New Zealand, but because the evidence is stacked up. This investment portfolio has never been wrong. Everything has taken place according to the Word. The last thing to happen is the last empire. Understanding this program that we're running for you is going to help you to understand the meaning of current global events. And we're going to look into the past. And we're going to identify things that are taking place in our lives today. We're going to know what the future holds. And we discover how to face the future with absolute hope and confidence. And I can promise you, as we go through this series, no matter what your lot in life, you're going to find increased meaning and purpose in life. I hope you want to come on the journey with me. I'm looking forward to it. That's just a taste that we've given you tonight. Tomorrow afternoon, we're going to be here at 3. We're going to take you to Pompeii and Masada. And we're going to have a look at a program called Global Warnings. I just want to pray a blessing over you as you go home. Father, thank you for outlining history for us. Thank you for the surety we can have that this final event will take place based on the evidence of fulfilled prophecies throughout the world's history. We know that the kingdom is coming, that you're going to establish. May we all have a part in it, and may we be safe as we travel home, we ask. In Christ Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you all. Well, I hope you enjoyed that presentation to see how the Bible, ancient history and archaeology intermesh and interface so clearly to show us the future that we're living in today. Don't miss the next program when we go visit the double tragedies of both Masada and Jerusalem in a program entitled Coming of the Romans. You don't want to miss that.